Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame on International Day of Forests. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. There are a lot of ways to tackle the climate crisis, which is one of the greatest challenges the international community has ever faced. And among them is putting a stop to deforestation and actually taking steps to replenish and restore the world's forests. In commemorating International Day of Forests, we'll take a closer look at the serious climate issues we are facing and the key role forests can play in effectively reducing the harm caused by carbon emissions. For this, we invited Chung Suh-yong, a professor at Korea University, into the studio. Professor Chung, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And we also have Director Sam Kimmins, Director of Energy at the Climate Group, on the line. Director Kimmins, thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. A pleasure to be here.
All right, Director Kimmins, first question to you. On Monday, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released its latest climate report. Could you give us the details of the results?
Well, I mean, it's actually a relatively short summary, and the latest report from the IPCC simply reiterates its previous warnings that the world is not moving to net zero fast enough. It's a sharp reminder to heads of state that we need to get on with it and implement the solutions that we know work now. The science continues to show that we need to move quickly and decisively in order to prevent our climate changing to an extent that will be catastrophic to our economies and to our way of life. In short, this means stopping burning fossil fuels and rapid acceleration of renewable energy.
Right, I see. So the United Nations did sound the alarm over the consequences of climate change. That being said, Director Kimmins, what kind of efforts have the international community been making up until now to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, quite simply, not enough. Not bold enough, not far-reaching enough. We have seen some efforts spurred on by Russia's invasion of Ukraine to move away from gas and increase energy security through renewables. Germany, for example, has increased their target and is taking action towards 80% renewables, up from 65%. In its energy mix by 2030. So we're seeing some ambitious uplift in targets in recognition that not only do renewables bring climate security, they also bring energy security. But we're also seeing messages the other way. Last year, subsidies for fossil fuels still stood at $1 trillion. And you have to question why we're still subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, which is making obscene profits during an energy crisis. But the good news is renewables are continuing to grow across the world. They're the cheapest way to produce electricity, and there's no reason to move not to move faster. Another good news story is that businesses are recognizing the crucial role they have in the acceleration towards net zero. RE100 members, companies that are committed to 100% renewable electricity, now count 400 companies. And the reason they're committed to renewable electricity is not just for the climate case, it's also because renewables make business sense. And really, governments need to help these businesses to achieve their 100% renewable goals by removing barriers that prevent renewables competing on a level playing field with fossil fuels in a fair market.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Chung, as part of such international efforts, the Korean government announced improved 2030 nationally determined contributions, and the target aims to reduce carbon emissions by more than 40% compared to 2018 levels. But as a recent report suggested that the industrial sector only has the capability to reduce the previously set emission reduction goal by 1/3, the government today announced a new adjusted plan. What is it about, and could you elaborate more on this?
Well, first of all, we gotta know that overall NDC target has not been changed. In other words, the 40% reduction, that's very important.
Right.
And then the question is how to achieve this goal by coordinating the different sectors. And then in that sense, the industry sector is one of the very difficult sectors in Korea to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because we used to have a very much energy intensive industrial sectors such as steel and automobiles and then petrochemicals and others. And then Korea produces these products not only for Korean consumers, but also actually other overseas consumers as well.
Right.
In the sense that overall, it's very difficult actually for us to decarbonize all these industrial sectors as much as we should. So in the sense that, of course, it was somewhat necessary for the government to adjust the already preset goal into the more realistic way. And at the same time, government instead emphasized the role of the power sector, also reduction overseas, so that Korea can still make a same level of the contributions to the global efforts to tackle climate change. So it's a more realistic solutions, I would say. And then we showed a very good commitment to tackle against the climate change once again by keeping the 40% reduction target.
Right, I see. Like Professor Chung said, Director Kimmins, government is maintaining the long-term goal of reducing more than 40% from 2018 levels by 2030. But in order to meet the goal, other sectors, including energy transition and transportation, need to up their goals. How should other sectors reduce carbon emissions?
That's a very large question. So I shall really, just to reiterate, the carbon emissions from industrial and domestic heating and cooling, electricity production, transport, steel production, across all sectors need to be cut. Every sector needs to play its part. There's no sector that can simply sit back and watch. As the IPCC said, everything, everywhere, all at once. But at the core of this, renewable electricity plays an incredibly important part. Renewables are at the core of the change. Whether you're charging electric vehicles, making green steel from green hydrogen, or greening the electricity grid, at the core of this is renewable electricity production. So the most important thing and the easiest thing for the Korean government to do right now is to remove the policy barriers that are stopping utility-scale renewables from competing on a level playing field with fossil fuels. This has been done elsewhere in the world, and companies around the world are benefiting from incredibly low costs of renewable electricity. Korea needs to get on board with that.
Right, I see. Now, Director Kimmins, one more question. Watchers are saying that South Korea could use Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which allows for the use of cooperative approaches, such as internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. Is this correct? And could you explain to us more?
Yeah, so there's a strong role for cooperation between countries, both technology transfer, sharing of expertise, etc. Now, unfortunately, many of the international efforts are going in the opposite direction, with many richer nations in Asia selling their old fossil fuel technology and know-how to developing nations. That's completely the wrong direction. But to look at my core field, renewable electricity, the context in which we're asked this question for RE100 is often, can we import renewables from nearby countries, from neighbouring countries? If we can't produce them ourselves, can we import them? Well, the answer is yes, if there is a physical grid connection and alignment of regulations. Obviously, you can't import electricity unless there's a wire to bring the electrons into the country. And there are certainly precedents for this. Europe is largely interconnected. New cables are currently being planned to transfer renewables from Morocco to the UK and from Australia to Singapore. So this is a very real proposition that you can import renewable electricity from not just your neighbours, from actually quite distant countries. The losses are relatively low on high voltage cables. It's a proven technology. So for Korea, this is a long-term possibility, if a little complex geopolitically. In the meantime, though, I would strongly recommend that Korea focuses on investment on domestic renewables rather than focus on investing on domestic renewables to tap into the vast solar resource and wind resource, rather than creating further reliance on neighbouring countries.
Right, I see. Now, since our Director Kimmins tapped on the RE100 initiative, I'd like to tap on that as well with our Professor Chung. Mandatory measures set by the government are important, but also significant are voluntary measures by companies as well. And businesses, as far as I know, were first committed to RE100, which is a global initiative of turning the energy sources into 100% of renewable energy. But recently, achieving the CF100 initiative looks more realistic. Is this correct? And what are the two differences between these two?
Right. Let me just first explain about how important these voluntary measures compare with sort of the mandatory measures, as you just said. So we usually think about the role of the government regulations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's a mandatory part.
Right.
But at the same time, actually, many of the emission-related activities are done by private sectors. They are outside the scope of the government regulations to a large extent. And then they are pursuing the making profits, and that they are more into directly the market rather than looking at the list of the government regulations. So in the sense that it will be wiser and more efficient for us to design the issues in the context of respecting the market's flow. So in that sense, RE100 is pretty good in terms of promoting renewables. Everybody knows that renewables must play a very important role. And then my colleague today emphasized, okay, Korea needs to boost the renewables domestically. I agree, but at the same time, if we take a look at the sort of the current situation in Korea in terms of how much expensive that the renewable technologies are compared with other countries, and Korea tend to have a lot more expensive actually cost to maintain the renewables for its own unique features, various. So in that sense, I think the CF100 might provide us with some of the flexibility, not only putting a lot of emphasis on the renewables, which is also important, but at the same time, other technologies which do not emit CO2s at all, such as nuclear and then green hydrogen. So in the sense that I know that especially inside Korea, the market players start to look at some of the potential benefits of this. I think overall, all these different standards needs to work together with the mandatory measures, as you said.
Right, I see. So, Director Kimmins, our Professor Chung said that CF100 could provide more flexibility to us. What are your thoughts on RE100 and CF100? Which initiative is most appropriate in your opinion?
So, just to clarify, green hydrogen is allowable within RE100. So you can generate electricity from green hydrogen, and to create green hydrogen, you need renewable electricity. There's no separation between the two. But just going back to RE100 more specifically, back in 2014 when we started, RE100 was considered very, very challenging. But over the last 9 years, the cost of renewables have dropped dramatically around the world and availability has soared. RE100 has proven to be both realistic and achievable. Indeed, over 10% of our 400 members have achieved their RE100 goal of 100% renewable electricity. And our membership now includes some of the biggest names in Korea: Samsung Electronics, Hyundai, SK Hynix, Kia, Korea Zinc, Korea Water Resource Corporation, which is a rock-solid vote of confidence from Korean business that RE100 is achievable. So we're rather baffled that there's a perceived need for what could be called a watered-down standard like CF100. And this does seem to be based, there are a few myths that we're concerned about in Korea, principally that RE100 is not possible due to land constraints. In reality, there's over 600 gigawatts of electricity capacity available from offshore wind. That's 4 times Korea's total capacity. The onshore resource is much bigger than it's estimated because it's constrained currently by land use planning constraints, which can simply be changed. So I would argue that CF100 is not really more realistic, it's just less ambitious. And there's a risk that it's seen as a license for business as usual at a time when South Korea is already lagging behind in the global race to renewables. Also, let's look at cost. The reason why the cost of renewables around the world is dropping incredibly fast is because of mass adoption. And Korea is currently missing out on that mass adoption simply because the regulations don't allow companies like SK Hynix, Samsung, etc., to build the extremely large wind farms, solar farms, etc., that they're able to build in neighboring countries and across Europe, US, across the world. Once the regulations are changed to allow and enable renewables to compete on a level playing field, that scale will be reached and the prices will drop and Korea will be able to compete in the global marketplace and compete in the race to renewables.
Right, I see.
The final concern I have is that CF100 could take companies down some blind alleys like carbon capture and storage, which despite billions of dollars of investment and decades of research and prototypes, has never achieved scale. And one might argue that things like CCS have been really pushed by the gas and coal industry to maintain their license to operate long past their sell-by date.
Right, so our director Kimmins is saying that a CF100 could be considered as quite less ambitious. Right. Since today is International Day of Forests, I'd like to highlight the fact that the halting forest loss and land degradation could also be one way to tackle the climate crisis. Could you elaborate more on key role forests could play?
Well, we are talking about the different technology options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then especially my colleague today is putting a lot of emphasis on the role of the renewables, which is great.
Yes.
And also there are other technologies, especially available in developing countries. If we go to Amazon and Central Africa, actually there is a vast amount of the forestry which can absorb the CO2 in a relatively lower cost. So in terms of the per unit emission reduction cost, and the forestry can be the more viable technology than other energy technologies available with us now. So in the sense that the forestry has been identified as one of the very good and then cost-effective and important technology, actually, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, if we talk about the forestry, it also provides us with other benefits, such as biodiversity, and then we feel like nature is important, and then it provides a sort of natural home for the, not only the human beings, also animals and others. And so in the sense that the nature-based solution has been identified as one of the very important and once again, viable technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Right, I can see that there are many benefits that forests could provide us. Professor Chung, I'd like to ask you more. It is said that one of the most positive outcomes for the forest sector was that countries finally reached an agreement on the rule book during COP26. What is this about? And since then, what discussions have taken place in terms of this forest sector?
Well, previously my colleague talked about the role of Article 6. Article 6 is the only article in the Paris Agreement which allows countries to cooperate to tackle climate change. This is the only article. So I always say that Article 6 is not just an article for the carbon market, it's more like an article for the cooperation among the countries. In that sense, as I said, Korea, we have a very successful experience in terms of reforestation. We are very proud of it, and then we are very good at adapting ourselves to apply the new rules to preserve the forest in the context of tackle climate change. Then why don't we just apply our experiences and our techniques for the developing countries in Africa, for instance, or in Amazon? So in the sense that Article 6 and its rule book that has been agreed at the time started to provide a more detailed foundation so that governments and private sectors can actually use them to develop develop their own creative mechanisms. Paris Agreement allows governments, for instance, to develop not only UN set the mechanisms, but also we can design the mechanisms ourselves with partner governments. And we can allow the private sectors, based on the rules that are allowed by the Paris Agreement, actually to apply, to be involved, so in a more cost-effective way. So isn't it a good thing for everybody?
It is, right. It is. And it's quite interesting that we could use forests to do that. And you just have mentioned that South Korea has this experience of reforestation. Could you briefly tell us more? And what role do you believe South Korea will be able to play in terms of forest restoration and halting deforestation?
Well, let me just tell you that no matter where we go in terms of celebrating something, we always plant trees, right? So that's the I think embedded culture that the South Koreans have because of our very successful experience in terms of reforestation. During the Korean War, we lost almost all the trees, right, in the Korean Peninsula, and then because of the reforestation policy led by the several former presidents. And then other leaders, then the Korea has been the most successful country, as you said, in terms of the keeping the forestry in the same square meter, right? We didn't have it, but now we have a lot. And then we have a capability to maintain all this forestry in a very good way in accordance with some of the available rules out there. So in that sense, Korea is ready, as I said, actually, to share all these ideas, not only with colleagues in Africa, also our colleagues in North Korea.
Right.
Very few people know that the North Koreans plan to tackle climate change is only about keeping the forestry. So that's why North Korean leaders are saying that we have to plant the trees and others. And then in addition to our past experience, once again, I would like to emphasize, we need to tap on the new Paris rules so that we are ready to go to cooperate with other partners.
Right, interesting. I'd like to ask our experts more questions, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Professor Chung and Director Kimmins, of course, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, this is all for Within the Frame tonight. We will be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching and goodbye.